If you're listening closely to the grapevine about where Valorant is as a game right now, you'll probably find that the general sentiment isn't too positive, whether that's about viewing figures for the esports or whether it's about the amount of players playing the game as well. Generally, it doesn't seem too great. But we're going to talk about whether that is actually the case, and if it is the case, how does Riot fix it? Speaking of fixing things, you might want to fix your poker game. And whether you're new to poker or are a long-time player, the place to do that is Raise Your Edge. Because Raise Your Edge has been helping thousands of people get better at poker, and the creator, Ben CB, is a professional poker player and has been crushing it for 13 years. And right now, you can get 25% off with a 14-day money-back guarantee. So right now is the time to do it by using the link in the description or the pinned comment. But if you're new to poker or want to get into it, then Raise Your Edge is the place to do it. And now back to the video. But as I said, you will find Reddit posts like this one. Almost a 25% decline viewership for VCT Americas at kickoff. And if you take a look at this graph, you will see you've got the 2025 hours watched here and the 2024 hours watched here. And you can see it's a pretty big decline for VCT Americas. It's a pretty big decline for VCT Pacific. It's actually quite a significant rise for EMEA. And the VCT China numbers we don't need to consider too much because in general, this is the Western viewing of China, which I think with Project Horizon has probably been helped now that there's some English commentary, but overall the China numbers themselves are very different. And we should start there, I think, actually, by talking about the Chinese numbers, because what we're going to talk about today doesn't really involve China, which kind of, is kind of a bit separated from the rest of the world in terms of access to those numbers. But as far as we can tell, the game is popping off in China. The viewership apparently for the grand finals of Champs in Team Heretics EDG was extremely high in China, like 1 million in the rest of the world to 8 million from China. Those kind of numbers were reported, which is insane when you think about that much of the viewership is coming just from China alone. And apparently the player base is also extremely healthy in China, as far as I'm aware. So what we're going to talk about today doesn't really include China because it seems like Valorant is kind of popping off there, but in the rest of the world, maybe it's not doing as great. Let's start by talking about, this viewership in kickoff from 2024 to 2025 and try and explain some of it. And also explain, why is EMEA rising so much? Well, I think that because EMEA is rising so much, what this tells you is that this is about specific things going on in the region and not necessarily Valorant being in complete decline, because here is a clear example of where it's not in complete decline. So what can we read into this? Well, if we take Americas and EMEA as our examples, right? In Americas, you've got teams like Sentinels, who were, arguably the face of the entire scene in VCT Americas. Well, they lost Tens and Sassy, two of the most popular players, in the entire region. Tens arguably the most popular player in the entire region, and then Sassy, one of the most popular Brazilian players, obviously will have negatively impacted Brazilians' interest in Sentinels as a team. And I think that can go to explain some of this drop. A lot of the big teams maybe not being quite as interesting as they once were, right? Like Loud not being a team that, people were expecting to do that great. So that I think can explain this, and also does go on to explain partly in EMEA as well. If you think about EMEA in 2024, you're basically looking at one team region, right? Everyone was just looking at Fnatic. Well, that's not that particularly interesting. But by 2025, we understood that Heretics were really good. Everyone had, now knows about Team Heretics coming into kickoff. Everyone obviously still knows about Fnatic, and you've also got Team Vitality at that time who were creating this super team. So perhaps there is more interest because there's more things going on than there was what we thought at the start of 2024, making it a bit more interesting. And I'm sure there are other factors as well, many other factors that go into why EMEA rose and why potentially America's, dropped off a bit, like, scheduling times for EMEA and all that kind of stuff, right? But it's not just looking at the viewership of the esport as well. There's also the player count to consider as well. So what I've got here is this is from tracker.gg, and this is the overall player base, according to them, of Valorant. Now, again, this won't include China, I'm pretty sure, and it also won't include every single player. I'm also pretty sure about that. But this does, I think, even if it's the actual numbers aren't correct, it probably does give you a pretty decent idea of when the peaks and troughs, of this game have been happening, and as a general trend, what's been going on, even if the actual numbers themselves aren't actually correct. So here you've got all of Valorant's history, right, on this timeline here. And you can see that there does seem to have been, some waves of of up and down, right? But it's mostly kind of steady, right? You see, like, you know, during 2020, early 2023, maybe we were on a bit of an upswing and then went down. You know, at the kind of late 2023, there was quite a substantial downswing. Then there was an upswing for 2024 as well through the first half of 2024. Then another downswing, and the peak this year, you know, maybe hasn't risen as much, and, you know, now we're kind of plateauing and maybe coming down again. But if you just look at these numbers in this graph, you know, you wouldn't say that this is a dying game, even though the most recent data is under 4.5 million according to tracker.dg, which is a number that isn't often being hit since kind of 2022. That wouldn't look like super positive, but it's not also super negative. And you can see some of the rises in this, right? Like, for instance, when we get to here in you know, August of 2024, this is when the game is coming out on console as well, right? So I'm guessing that that is somewhat explaining, you know, some of these peaks, but you can see it does look like a little bit of a decline overall in the more recent data. And of course, some of that decline can be explained by other games coming out, of course, as well, right? Like Marvel Rivals, I'm sure will have taken some of the Valorant player base away. Overwatch 2 releasing their stadium mode. I know some of my friends have been pretty excited about that as well. You know, there are always going to be other games that either come out or, you know, reinvent themselves or whatever that might take away some of the player base. But I think for me, what's been lacking in Valorant for really the past couple of years is just something really new, fun, and exciting that was unexpected. We're expecting new agents to come out. We're expecting new maps to come out, and it's great when they do. And, you know, exploring new maps or new agents can be a lot of fun, and that's great. But at this point, we're expecting those to come out, and there isn't that necessarily feeling of like, wow, this completely changes my whole worldview of this game. What I think we need is new game modes to come out. The last real new game mode to come out for Valorant was Team Deathmatch, and that was 2 years ago at this point. That was 2023. And I think particularly once the replay viewer is out, I'm hoping that Riot then has the resources that, you know, the game is out on console, they've done the replay viewer, that then they can focus on things like game modes and getting out new, particularly casual game modes. That is what I think that this game is missing in abundance. And there is a ton of different ideas that even I have about creating, you know, different game modes. And it can just be, you know, simple things like a different way of playing a certain map, right? Like a capture the flag rather than, you know, the search and destroy if I'm using COD terms, right? Just simple things like that even could help. But, you know, a ton of like different casual game modes could exist in a game like Valorant, but they just don't, and they don't seem to have made that a priority whatsoever. And so that's left us with, you know, game modes like escalation and replication and stuff like that that have been in the game forever and feel kind of stale and outdated maybe at this point, and then just a lack of other options. There seems to be quite a few ways of playing, you know, in terms of ranked and premier if you're more serious about the game, but if you want to just have some like really like casual, relaxed, you know, gameplay of Valorant, it doesn't necessarily feel like those options are there for you. And so this is my plea to Riot to please make new game modes, new ways of playing, like kind of Overwatch Stadium was for this game, right? Where it's a completely new way, new thoughts about the game, right? It's still the same characters, it's still the same overall gameplay when you're in there, perhaps for the most part, but there are different elements to it, and there's different strategy to it, and there's different ways that you want to do things, right? That's what I'd like to see for Valorant, is that kind of thing in Valorant, because I think that that would really help rejuvenate some of the interest of actually, you know, getting into this game and enjoying it again. So in conclusion, is Valorant dying? No, Valorant is not dying. It's still a very popular game and probably will be for the foreseeable future, but I do think it can be improved. And I do think that game modes in particular are the way in for Riot to really heighten this game's experience from what I would say is okay right now to being exceptional.